So the Buttercup family, I guess it's pretty well named. This does look like a little dish of butter. I mean, very, very buttery yellow flowers. They're beautiful, no doubt. This family is a little hard to make sense of, though, because the plants themselves are really variable. About the only thing that holds them together is the flowers with lots of stamens and pistils. Take a look at this example. And these are the nice, pretty ones from around Washington State. So you have Delphinium with blue flowers, red columbine with red and yellow, and of course Buttercup with its buttery flower. The anemone with this kind of messy tangle of seeds. That's a lot of variation, and part of that maybe because of where they sit on the plant family tree. Over here, off kind of to themselves, they're in the eudicot group, but not the core eudicots like the rest. They branch off a little bit earlier along with poppies and the barberry family. And so maybe they've had a little more time to evolve. They're not quite as primitive as the magnolias and water lilies, but there they are, kind of off to themselves. What holds this family together? How do you know you have one? Well, again, it's pretty variable. We got vines, we got shrubs, we got mostly herbaceous plants. They don't have any spines or anything like that. They're pretty simple as far as that goes, but their leaves can be simple or compound, alternate or opposite. You see where I'm going with this? It's not exactly held together well. Most of the time, they have 5 petal-like sepals, like you see over here on the red columbine. The red parts are actually the sepals, and then the petals are yellow there. So they can have 5 petals, but sometimes there's a whole bunch of them. Stamens, often a lot, sometimes just 5, and then pistils, again, very often there's a lot, but sometimes just 1. Fruits are always dry, so no berries or anything on this group. We got these big achenes, usually with some fluff attached to them, or these simple follicles that dry and just split down one seam. So not exactly one common theme here, a lot of variation. Let's start with larkspur. Larkspur you'll find just about anywhere. You'll find it in flower gardens, in the shrub steppe underneath sagebrush. You'll find it on mountain ridges like this one. You'll find it in meadows, but you'll always be able to spot it. These bright, bright blue flowers just stand out. There's not a lot of natural blue in nature, well, except for the sky, but it's brought a little bit of that sky down with it, that sky blue beauty onto the ground. Called larkspur because they have this spur on the back. In this bottom image, you can see that little projection. These are actually part of the sepals, which are the showy part of the plant. That contains a reward of nectar, which attracts pollinators to it. So it's kind of flower's job is to do that, and these do it spectacularly. The flowers are bilaterally symmetrical, so they have a left half and a right half to them. So that's a bit unusual. They're not symmetrical and radial like a lot of flowers. Very complex shape to them. They occur on this kind of long raceme. There's several just up in a straight line. And when they mature into seed pods, then it's just this simple follicle right here which dries and splits and releases little seeds. Most of the leaves are basal. It's a little out of focus on the background here. These have kind of faded, but basal leaves, and then you have the stem coming up with a few of these palmately dissected leaves on the stem. Kind of a smaller version of what's on the ground. You can find these blooming at lower elevations starting around May, and June or July up in the mountains where it takes a little longer for summer to kick in. But wherever you see them, they're sure to brighten your day. The biggest misfit of this family to me is clematis. It's this crazy sprawling vine that usually is in the shrub steppe and just kind of takes over some shrub that's unlucky enough to have one of these seeds germinate by it. And it just goes all over the place. Most members of this family are perennial herbaceous plants. And there are actually perennial herbaceous versions of clematis, but the one I'm showing you here is a vine. And it's a woody vine. It looks chaotic, but when you get up close and you start actually studying it, you'll see that it has opposite leaves, and that they're compound. There's usually 5 to 7 leaflets out here, kind of widely scattered. And this one hasn't grabbed anything yet, but what happens, kind of like a pea vine, these petioles, the leaf stalks themselves, they will start wrapping themselves around other stems and just curling around to hang on. And they dry really hard, and they just hang on there for a long time. The older stems get kind of crusty and woody. So here's another look at that leaf in a little healthier version. The petals, or the flowers themselves, are fairly simple. They have lots of stamens and lots of pistils. And then they have 4, instead of 5, but 4 white sepals. No petals, just the sepals. And all those mature into these achenes, kind of like a sunflower seed, but with a long plume attached so they can blow off on the wind and go cause chaos for some other shrub. So there's western white clematis. Well, the buttercups are a lovely little family, and there are a lot of them, so they're hard to identify, but not this one. There are about 40 different species in the Pacific Northwest in ranunculus, so if you have one, a little tough to identify it to species, but they're easy to spot as a group with these buttery yellow flowers. Now, the sagebrush buttercup is a fascinating plant. It grows very differently than most. Most of them grow in meadows and other moist places, maybe by streams, but this one's out right there in the sagebrush. Now, it didn't completely lose its senses. It comes up as soon as the snow is melted off. The ground is still really damp and wet, usually held in by a lot of clay, all that moisture, and flowers in March, maybe April, and then by June or July, this plant's completely withered up and dried, except for the underground rootstock that stays there all summer and just kind of goes dormant. These have these kind of clunky mitten-like leaves instead of the finely dissected leaves of most buttercups. But it does have the 5 buttery petals and lots of stamens and lots of pistils that give rise to these really simple little beaked achenes, just dry, single-seeded fruits. So there's the sagebrush buttercup. Look for it early in the spring. I'm sure it'll brighten your day. In contrast to the simplicity of the sagebrush buttercup, you have the intricacy of the red columbine. These usually grow in moist areas. They're perennial herbs, but they can grow in dry, rocky soil as well, provided you have a little extra water there underneath the soil. They have very dissected leaves and usually a healthy amount of foliage, which can get up to knee-high or so, and then the flower stalks above that can reach as high as your waist even. Although this one over here on the left, growing in a drier habitat, obviously much shorter, barely up to the top of my boot. But obviously the real wonder of this plant is the flower. So much like the larkspur with those swept back sepals and the nectar, you can see the little nectary right on the top of this spur, and there are 5 of them all together, providing a nectary reward for whatever pollinator will come its way, which is usually a hummingbird. If you're around one of these in full bloom, you probably won't have to wait all that long to find a hummingbird coming. They're attracted by the red. It's got all this sugar held up top, just waiting for a long beak to probe in there and lick up some of the nectar while it gets dusted with pollen with these anthers hanging down here. Interestingly, these are actually the petals right here in yellow. It's the sepals that are the big showy red structures. Overall, a spectacular flower and fairly common, so enjoy it when you see it. Well, that's it for the Buttercup family. Kind of an interesting group that doesn't hold together real easily, but they are just a joy to behold. Until next time, happy botanizing.